Dear learners, in this lecture, we shall be continuing with our discussion on the kinds of companies which can be formed under the company law. In this part 2 lecture on this topic, I shall be discussing the kind of companies which come under two classifications, that is ownership and nationality. We would be taking up their concepts, features, structure, points of differentiation, along with the provisions governing them under the company law. So in the previous part 1 lecture, I had already laid out before you the framework of the 9 kinds of classification. So the classification under the first two heads, that is mode of incorporation and liability, was taken up in the part 1 lecture. Now in the part 2 lecture, we shall be taking up the further two classifications of ownership and nationality. So ownership is the third kind of a classification we have. So firstly, on the basis of this classification, we have government company, and secondly, we have a non-government company. Now we shall be taking up both these two kind of companies in some detail. A government company is a company that is defined under Section 2, Subclause 45 of the Companies Act 2013. According to this provision, a government company means any company in which not less than 51% of the paid up share capital is held by the central government or by any state government or governments, or partly by the central government and partly by one or more state governments. It also includes a company which is a subsidiary company of such government company. So, as you would acknowledge, this is a rather long and complex definition, but to simplify it for the benefit of our learners, a government company is a company in which the majority shares, they are held by the government in one form or the other. Now, the examples of a government company include companies like Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, Coal India Limited, so on and so forth. Next, we have a non-government company which is not defined under the Companies Act. Rather, it is to be understood in contrast with the government company. So, a non-government company is a company which is not owned by the government, or the government does not have a majority stake in the company. The government stake in the company is determined through its shareholding. If the shareholding is more than 51%, it is in majority. Less than 51%, it is in minority. A non-government company, unlike a government company, is controlled by non-government or private persons. Most of the companies that we know of, they are non-government companies. An example of a non-government company is Reliance Industries Limited, which is privately owned. Many of the other commercial companies that we know of, like Tata Sons Limited, Infosys Limited, Wipro, so on and so forth, they are non-government companies. Now, to take some more discussion on the kinds of companies under this head, I would be further elaborating on the various aspects of the word government which is used in the context of a government company. So this word may have many meanings as used under Section 2, Subclause 45 of the Companies Act. So a government here may mean central government, which entirely on its own has a majority stake in a company, in which case it would be regarded as a government company owned by the central government. Then, if the company is owned entirely by one state, it is known as a state government company. It is possible that a company may be jointly owned by two or more states, in which case it would be regarded as a company which is jointly owned by two or more state governments. Apart from that, a company may be owned by central government in collaboration with a state government, in which case it would be regarded as a government company owned by the center as well as a state government. And the last kind of classification which can be had of the word government is if it is jointly owned by central government on one hand and two or more state governments on the other hands, in which case it would be regarded as a government company jointly owned by central government and two or more state governments. So the word government does not have a singular meaning. Rather, it could be a central government entirely on its own, state government entirely on its own, two or more state governments, central government and one state government, and central government and one or more state governments. An important explanation to a government company is that a subsidiary company of government company is also a government company. Now, what is a subsidiary company? This kind of a company we'll discuss in a later lecture, but to just explain it for the purposes of this government company, a subsidiary company is a company which is controlled by another company, or we can say it is subservient to another company. That another company is known as the dominant company, and legally speaking it is known as a holding company. So a subsidiary company of a government company is also a government company. This is an explanation to this clause of defining a government company. Now let us try to understand this explanation with the help of an illustration. Now supposing there is a company which goes by the name of Mangalore Refinery and Petrochemicals Limited, MRPL. It is a subsidiary company of another company whose name is Oil and Natural Gas Corporation Limited, ONGC. So here ONGC controls another company which is MRPL. Now ONGC is a government company, and so therefore MRPL, being a subsidiary of a government company, by extension will also become a government company. Then let us compare a government company on one hand and a statutory company on the other hand. Now statutory company is a company that we have discussed in a previous lecture, when a company is formed by a statute. So in regards the formation is concerned, the government company is registered under the Companies Act, whereas a statutory company is formed by a special act of parliament or a state legislature, as the case may be. The governance of a government company which is registered under the Companies Act is according to the provisions of the Companies Act, company rules, and the memorandum and articles of association. Whereas in case of a statutory company, it is according to the special act which actually forms such statutory company. On the question of ownership, there is some similarity, because a government company is a company which has a majority of government shareholding, so it is owned by the government. And in most cases of statutory company, they are also owned by the government, or majority stake is of the government. Now, insofar as the purposes of these two companies are concerned, they could be different. So a government company may be for profit, So, while profit can be one of the objectives of a government company, it does not remain its only objective. So, while it does conduct business, but it seeks to conduct business essentially for public welfare. Whereas a statutory company has a more social economic function, obviously also of public welfare. So there could be some differences insofar as the purposes of these two kinds of companies are concerned. Profit can be there in both, but an element of public functions are also there in these two kinds of companies. A government company which is registered under the Act has invariably a share capital, whereas a statutory company, it may or may not have a share capital. It depends upon the statute which forms it, whether it provides for shareholding or not. Then the next kind of a classification that we have, fourth classification, is on the basis of nationality. Under this classification head, we have two kinds of companies, namely a foreign company and an Indian company. Now, a foreign company is a company that is defined under Section 2, Subclause 42 of the Companies Act 2013. According to this provision, a foreign company means a company or body corporate incorporated outside India, which, Part A, has a place of business in India, whether by itself or through an agent, physically or through electronic mode, and conducts any business activity in India in any other manner. The words electronic mode has extensive ambit to include different kinds of services and businesses such as e-commerce, online consultancy, financial services, etc. An example of a foreign company is Ford and Samsung, which are registered in another jurisdiction and have a place of business in India's domestic jurisdiction. Next, explaining an Indian company is not defined under the Companies Act. Rather, it has to be understood in contrast with a foreign company. So, an Indian company is a company which is incorporated or registered under the Companies Act of India. An Indian company may have businesses in other countries or nations. However, this fact does not make it a foreign company. An example is Infosys, Tata Consultancy Services, and there are various other Indian companies which are registered under the Indian company law but perform business outside India. But it is immaterial whether they perform business outside India or not. What is important is they have to be registered under the Indian company law. So the point of differentiation between an Indian company and a foreign company is the nationality of the place where the company is registered and not where the company has business. With this, we come to the end of this lecture, classifying companies under the two heads of ownership and nationality. So under ownership, we have discussed a government company and a non-government company. What differentiates a government company and a non-government company? We also discussed in detail the various permutations and combinations of the word government could be there. Central government, state government, two or more state governments, central government and a state government, and central government or two or more state governments. Then on the basis of nationality, a foreign company and an Indian company. What is the difference between the two? And what is the main point here which differentiates them? That is the place of incorporation or registration of a company which determines its nationality and not exactly the place of its business. But for a foreign company to be called a foreign company as according to the Indian company law, it has to be registered outside, but it has to have a place of business in India. With this, we come to the end of this lecture on the kinds of companies with respect to the classification of ownership and nationality. We shall be continuing with the discussion on kinds of companies in the upcoming lectures. Thank you.